started with a single file. Just one small digital package, no bigger than a photo you'd send to a friend. Uploaded to a little-known corner of the internet most people didn't even know existed. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with sirens or headlines. But within hours, it began to ripple outward like a stone dropped into a still pond. Except this pond was the entire world. And the ripples turned into waves. The file appeared on a forum used mostly by privacy advocates, amateur cryptographers, and a few paranoid tech hobbyists who believed governments were always watching. No one knew who posted it. The username was a string of random letters and numbers, and the message that came with it was just 3 words. See for yourself. At first, no one paid much attention. Files like this popped up all the time. Conspiracy theories wrapped in encryption, wild claims about secret moon bases or hidden bank accounts. Most were nonsense. But this one was different. Someone managed to crack part of the encryption, just enough to pull out a few documents, a blurred photo, and a short audio clip that sounded like a tense radio transmission between unidentified voices. The photo showed a dark sedan parked outside a nondescript building in Virginia. The license plate was smudged, but the timestamp in the corner, October 17, 2023, was clear. The documents, though heavily redacted, contained phrases like temporary executive hold, national security override, and most shockingly, the name Barack Obama. Not as a witness, not as a consultant, but as someone subject to restricted movement protocols. People laughed at first, then they double-checked, then they started sharing. Within 12 hours, the fragments were everywhere, on message boards and group chats, even whispered about in office break rooms. A few small independent news blogs picked it up, cautiously framing it as unverified claims. But the seed was planted. And then, just as the story was about to fade into the noise of the internet, one man gave it rocket fuel. Elon Musk quote-tweeted a post that read, "If this is real, who gave the order? And who's covering it up?"
He didn't say it was true.
He didn't say it was false. But coming from him, the billionaire who owned the platform where billions got their news, it might as well have been a declaration. His followers exploded. Within minutes, Obama detained was trending worldwide. News anchors stumbled over their words trying to explain what was happening. Government spokespeople scrambled to respond, but their denials sounded rehearsed, vague, and oddly defensive. What made it stick wasn't just the claim, it was how it felt possible. People were tired of secrets, tired of being told one thing while leaks and documents suggested another. The idea that a former president, any former president, could be quietly taken off the grid even for a few hours, didn't seem like science fiction anymore. It felt like the next logical step in a world where surveillance was everywhere, and power often operated in the shadows. But here's the thing, no one talked about it first. The file wasn't just about Obama. Buried deeper in the code, hidden, behind layers of misdirection, was something else. A series of encrypted logs showing unusual data requests routed through commercial satellite networks. And one name kept appearing in the metadata. Starlink. That's when people started asking a different question. Not just did this happen, but who wanted us to find out? Back in the forum where it all began, the original poster vanished. Their account was deleted, no trace. But someone else, maybe a friend, maybe a rival, uploaded a second file. Smaller this time. Just a short video clip, grainy and shaky like it was filmed on an old phone through a car window. It showed a man in a dark coat getting into an unmarked SUV outside a private residence in Washington, D.C. The face wasn't clear, but the posture, the walk, it looked familiar. Too familiar. Within the hour, facial recognition software, the kind anyone could access online now, matched it with 87% confidence to Barack Obama. Again, not proof, but enough to make people's stomachs drop. The White House issued a statement calling the footage fabricated or taken out of context. Obama's office released a calm, measured note saying he was at home with family, as always, and urged people not to feed into baseless rumors. But by then, the story had a life of its own. It wasn't just on social media. It was on cable news, radio talk shows, even supermarket tabloids. People argued about it at dinner tables. Teachers had to pause lessons because students were buzzing about it. In bars and bus stops and waiting rooms, the same question echoed, "Do you think it's real?" And then came the twist no one expected. Late that night, Elon Musk posted again. Not a quote, not a link, just a single sentence. Follow the data, not the noise, that was it. No explanation, but to the tech-savvy crowd it was a direct invitation. Within minutes, coders and data analysts around the world began dissecting public satellite logs, government procurement records, and even traffic camera archives. They weren't looking for proof of an arrest, they were looking for anomalies, gaps, inconsistencies, and they found some, a sudden spike in encrypted communications between certain federal agencies on the night of October 16, a temporary blackout in local cell tower data near Obama's neighborhood that lasted exactly 47 minutes. A rental car company in Virginia reporting an unexplained vehicle return, cleaned too thoroughly, according to the clerk who spoke anonymously to a blogger. None of it proved anything on its own. But together, it painted a picture that felt too detailed to be pure fiction. Meanwhile, in quiet rooms across Washington, people who really did know what happened were sweating. Not because Obama had been arrested, that part wasn't true, but because something had happened. Something classified, something that, if misunderstood, could unravel public trust in ways no one could control. What they didn't realize was that the truth might not matter anymore. In the new information ecosystem, perception moved faster than facts. And someone, maybe Musk, maybe someone else, had figured out how to steer that perception like a ship in a storm. By dawn, the story had mutated. Some claimed Obama was being held for treason. Others said he'd uncovered a deep state plot and was silenced. A few even suggested he'd faked his own disappearance as a warning to the public. The wilder the theory, the more it spread. Algorithms rewarded outrage, confusion, and urgency. Calm voices got drowned out. But in a small apartment in Chicago, a journalist who'd spent years chasing government secrets sat at her kitchen table with 3 monitors glowing in the dark. She'd seen this pattern before, the mix of real data and manufactured mystery, the way a tiny truth could be inflated into a global panic. She recognized the fingerprints. This wasn't just a leak. It was a performance, and the audience was already hooked. She poured herself more coffee, opened a secure messaging app, and typed a single line to a source she hadn't contacted in years. "Is this your work?" The reply came instantly, "Not mine, but I know who's pulling the strings." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Because if that was true, if someone powerful was using this moment not just to expose a secret, but to reshape the narrative around power itself, then this wasn't just about Obama. It was about everything, and it was only the beginning. Outside, the city woke up. People checked their phones, saw the headlines, felt that familiar mix of dread and curiosity. They didn't know it yet, but their trust in leaders, in media, in each other, was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, all because of one file, one post, one sentence from a man who owned the wires through which the whole world now spoke. The rain started falling again, soft and steady, washing the streets clean. But online, the storm was just getting started. The morning after the story broke, most people were still trying to figure out what to believe. But one person wasn't waiting for answers. She was chasing them. She'd been a reporter for over 15 years. Not the kind who chased celebrity gossip or viral stunts, but the kind who sat in dusty courthouses, read through boring government contracts, and called sources at midnight because she noticed a typo in a budget report that didn't add up. She'd learned long ago that truth rarely shouts. It whispers, and you have to lean in close to hear it. When the first fragments about Obama's supposed arrest surfaced, her gut told her something was off. Not because it couldn't happen, but because it felt too neat, too dramatic. Real government secrets were messy, full of crossed wires and bureaucratic delays. This felt staged, like someone had taken a real event, twisted it just enough and dropped it into the world like a lit match in dry grass. She started with the file itself. Not the wild theories online, but the raw data. She reached out to a few old contacts, people who worked in cybersecurity, former intelligence analysts who'd left the game but still kept an ear to the ground. One of them agreed to meet, not over email or phone, but in person at a quiet diner on the edge of town. No cameras, no phones on the table. Over coffee that tasted like burnt water, he slid a small notebook across the table. "You're asking about Praetorian Veil," he said quietly. That's not a real operation name, at least not officially, but it's close enough to real protocols that someone inside could have made it up to sound credible. She leaned forward. So it's fake? Not entirely, he said. There are continuity of government drills. They've been running them since the Cold War. Presidents, former presidents, key officials, they all get pulled into simulations where everything goes wrong. Cyber attacks, assassinations, coups. The idea is to test who takes charge if the system collapses. But Obama was never arrested, she said. No, he replied. But during one of these drills last fall, something went sideways. A miscommunication. A junior officer thought a simulation was real. For about 3 hours, Obama's security detail was put on high alert, and he was asked to stay in a secure location, not because he was in trouble, but because they needed to verify whether a foreign cyber intrusion had compromised his communications. She blinked, so he was never detained. He was just kept safe during a drill? Exactly. Standard procedure, really. But someone inside the loop, maybe someone who didn't like how the drill was handled, or maybe someone with an agenda, leaked a distorted version. Made it look like he'd been taken against his will. She sat back, mind racing. That explained the blurred photo, the vague documents, the radio chatter. It was all real, but twisted. Like taking a family photo and scribbling handcuffs on it, then claiming it's evidence of a crime, but then came the next piece, the part that chilled her. Here's what's stranger, her contact said, lowering his voice even more. The leak didn't come through normal channels. It bypassed internal networks entirely. And the data trail? It points to an external satellite uplink. Commercial grade. She knew what he was hinting at. Starlink, he nodded. Someone used a private satellite network to pull data that should have been air-gapped, completely offline. That shouldn't be possible unless someone with access to both the network and high-level intel made it happen, she finished. They didn't say the name. They didn't need to. Back at her apartment, she spent the next 2 days digging. She filed public records requests, dry, tedious paperwork that most people would find boring, but that often held the keys to bigger stories. She asked for logs of Starlink data requests from federal agencies in October. She knew they'd redact most of it, but sometimes even the redactions told a story. Patterns in what was hidden could be as revealing as what was shown. While she waited, she tracked down a former technician who'd worked on government comms integration with private satellite systems. He wouldn't go on record, but over a crackling phone line, he confirmed something unsettling. There's a back-channel protocol. Not public. Not even in most manuals. If a national emergency is declared, even a simulated one, certain private networks can be granted temporary access to monitor or reroute secure traffic. It's supposed to be a fail-safe. Who controls that access? She asked. Technically, the Department of Defense, but the handshake, the actual switch, requires authentication from the network provider too. In other words, both sides had to agree. The government couldn't just tap into Starlink, and Starlink couldn't just snoop on government traffic, unless someone on the inside said yes, and that's when she found it. Tucked into a routine FCC filing, a boring document about bandwidth allocation, was a footnote. A single line noting an emergency override authorization granted to a Starlink ground station in Virginia on October 16th. The date matched the drill. The location matched the blurred photo. It wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was a thread, and she pulled it. Her next call was to a lawyer who specialized in national security law. He listened patiently, then said, "What you're describing isn't illegal." Not technically. But it's a massive gray area. If a private company used that access not just to assist, but to collect and later leak data for public consumption, that's not just unethical. It could violate executive orders, privacy statutes, maybe even the Espionage Act, if intent can be proven. But why would anyone do that? She asked. What's the point? There was a long pause. Maybe it's not about Obama at all, he said finally. Maybe he's just the face on the story. The real target is trust itself. Make people believe the system is broken, that even former presidents aren't safe. And suddenly the old rules don't matter anymore. And someone new gets to write the next chapter. She hung up, staring out her window at the city lights. It made a terrible kind of sense. In a world where attention was the most valuable currency, chaos was profitable. And no one had more tools to create, control, or amplify chaos than the people who owned the platforms, the satellites, the algorithms. That night, she received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. Just a link. She opened it carefully through a secure browser. It led to a private server hosting a short audio file. She put on headphones. At first, it was just static. Then a voice, calm, professional, said, "Confirm Praetorian Veil status." Another voice replied, "Simulation active. Subject secure. No breach." Then a third voice, lower, sharper, cut in, "Log all comms. Full archive. Send to external node alpha." Silence. She played it again and again. The third voice wasn't part of the drill. It didn't belong. And external node alpha, in Starlink's internal naming system, was a known designation for a high-priority data relay used only for top-tier clients. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she had a theory. Someone inside the government, maybe a disillusioned official, maybe a true believer in transparency, had triggered the leak, but they didn't send it to the press. They sent it through a channel they knew would be monitored by a certain tech billionaire, and he, seeing an opportunity, didn't just pass it along. He polished it, amplified it, made it into a spectacle, not to expose corruption, but to prove a point that he could move the world with a single post. She wrote her article carefully. No wild claims, no speculation, just facts. The drill existed, the miscommunication happened, the satellite access was real, and the leak bore signs of external shaping. She quoted experts, cited documents, and emphasized that Obama was never under arrest. But she also asked the harder question: when a private citizen can access, interpret, and broadcast classified-level events, who's really in control? She sent it to her editor with a note. This isn't just a story about a former president. It's about power in the digital age. The piece published at noon. Within an hour, it was shared over 200,000 times. Not because it was sensational, but because it offered clarity in a fog of noise. People were tired of being played. They wanted to understand, not just react. And then, just as the article began to shift the conversation, Elon Musk posted again. Not a denial. Not an admission, just a link to her article, with the caption, "Read this, then ask who benefits from silence." It was genius. He looked like a truth-teller, not a manipulator. He'd used her work to reinforce his own narrative without saying a word against it. She stared at her screen, equal parts furious and impressed. He hadn't lied. He'd just let the truth serve his purpose. That evening, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. A calm voice said, "You're close, but you're still missing the real reason this happened." "Who is this?" she asked. "A friend of the system," the voice replied. "And a warning, stop digging. What's coming next isn't about exposure. It's about replacement." The line went dead. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, heart pounding. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars honking, people laughing. Life going on as if nothing had changed. But she knew better. The game had shifted. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret anymore. It was about who got to decide what truth meant and who got to build the world that came after. The silence after that phone call lasted only a few hours, just long enough for the reporter to pace her apartment, replay the voice in her head, and wonder if she'd imagined it. But then the world moved again, louder this time, and there was no room for doubt. News broke that Elon Musk had convened a private meeting at his headquarters in Texas, not with engineers or investors, but with a group of people rarely seen together in the same room. Libertarian lawmakers, venture capitalists known for funding anti-government startups, and a handful of former intelligence officials who'd left public service under unclear circumstances. The gathering wasn't secret. Musk posted a photo of the group around a table, all smiling like it was just another strategy session. But the caption read, "Building the future one truth at a time." To most, it looked like PR. To those paying attention, it felt like a declaration. The reporter dug into the guest list. One name stood out, a former deputy director at a major intelligence agency who'd resigned abruptly 2 years earlier, citing ethical concerns. She tracked down an old colleague of his, now teaching at a small college. Over a hesitant phone call, he admitted, he didn't quit because of ethics. He quit because he saw where things were headed. He believed the system was too slow, too broken to fix from the inside. "And now?" she asked. "Now?" the voice on the other end said quietly. "He thinks the only way to save democracy is to rebuild it outside the old walls." That phrase, outside the old walls, kept echoing in her mind. It sounded noble, almost poetic, but it also sounded dangerous, because when someone says the old system is beyond repair, what they're really saying is, "I'm going to make a new one, and I'll decide who gets in." She filed more public records requests, this time targeting Musk's companies, not just Starlink but Neuralink, even his AI ventures. She wasn't looking for smoking guns. She knew those wouldn't exist in writing. She was looking for patterns, connections, the quiet ways power accumulates when no one's watching. What she found surprised even her. Buried in routine corporate filings was a little-noticed clause. X had quietly updated its content moderation policy to allow verified disclosures of government misconduct, even if they came from unverified sources, so long as they were in the public interest. The definition of public interest? Left entirely to an internal review board, whose members weren't disclosed. In other words, Musk's team now decided what counted as truth. Even more telling was a contract amendment between Starlink and a little-known federal agency tasked with emergency communications. The new language gave Starlink the right to retain anonymized metadata from any government data routed through its network during declared emergencies. On paper, it was for system optimization. In practice, it meant they could keep logs of who was talking to whom, when, and for how long, even during classified drills. She cross-referenced that with the Praetorian Veil timeline. The dates matched perfectly. This wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Step by step, over years, a private empire had woven itself into the fabric of national security, not as a contractor, but as a gatekeeper. And now, with one carefully timed leak, that empire was showing the world just how much it could see, and how much it could reveal. But why? What did Musk really want? She spent a night watching old interviews, reading speeches, tracing the evolution of his public statements. Early on, he talked about innovation, Mars, electric cars. Then came the talk about free speech, censorship, digital rights. Lately, it had shifted again, toward something bigger. Sovereign digital spaces. Decentralized governance. Humanity's next operating system. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about control. Not the old kind, tanks and borders and laws, but a new kind built on code, satellites, and attention. A world where the rules weren't written by elected officials, but by those who owned the platforms where people lived, worked, and thought. And Obama's name? It was never really about him. He was a symbol, the embodiment of the old order, the establishment, the system Musk claimed was failing. By dragging his name into chaos, even falsely, Musk wasn't attacking a man. He was attacking an idea, that democracy must be slow, messy, and accountable. The reporter wrote a new piece. This one didn't just lay out facts, it connected the dots. She showed how the leak, the satellite access, the policy changes, and the private meetings all pointed toward a single vision, a future where private tech leaders didn't just influence power, they replaced it. She expected pushback. She got something else. Within hours of publication, her article was flooded with comments, not from bots, but from real people, many of them young, many frustrated with politics as usual. Finally, someone saying it, one wrote, "Why should we trust politicians who lie for a living when we've got people actually building the future?" Another said. A third, "If the system's rigged, why not let someone new run it?" She felt a chill. It wasn't anger she was seeing. It was hope. And that was far more dangerous because hope, when misplaced, can be weaponized. Then came the legal move no one saw coming. Musk's team filed a massive Freedom of Information Act request, not just for Obama's security logs, but for every document related to continuity of government drills going back 20 years. They demanded full transparency, framing it as a public right to know. Government lawyers scrambled to respond, arguing national security. But the court of public opinion had already shifted. To millions, it looked like the government was hiding something. Again. The reporter watched as mainstream news outlets, desperate for clicks, began echoing Musk's framing. "Why won't they release the files? became the new headline. The nuance, the fact that these drills were meant to be secret by design, to prevent enemies from exploiting them, got lost in the noise. She tried to push back. She went on a few podcasts, wrote op-eds, even appeared on a late-night news segment. But every time she explained the risks of exposing emergency protocols, she was painted as part of the deep state trying to protect its secrets. It was exhausting and lonely. One evening, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You're asking the right questions, but you're still looking in the wrong places." She plugged in the drive. It contained internal chat logs from a secure messaging app used by a small team inside Musk's orbit, not illegal to possess, just incredibly hard to get. The messages were mundane at first, meeting schedules, code updates, lunch orders, but then a thread from October 15th, just one day before the drill. "Final check on Veil access? Confirmed. Node Alpha live. They'll never see it coming. Good, let the simulation run. We'll handle the aftermath. Remember, this isn't about him. It's about proving the system can be bypassed." Understood. Truth is just the first tool. She read it 3 times. Her hands shook. This wasn't whistleblowing. This was theater. A staged event designed not to expose corruption, but to demonstrate that the old system could be penetrated, manipulated, and ultimately made irrelevant. And the audience? The entire world. She realized then that Musk wasn't trying to bring down the government. He was trying to make it obsolete. Why fight for control of a sinking ship when you can build your own? The next morning, she called her editor. "I need to go deeper," she said. "Not just what happened, but what comes next." Her editor hesitated. "You're already getting threats. Your email's been hacked twice. Are you sure?" "I'm not doing this for clicks," she said. "I'm doing it because if no one explains what's really happening, people will wake up one day in a world they didn't choose, run by someone who never asked for their vote." She spent the next week tracking down former employees from Musk's companies, people who'd left quietly, often with non-disclosure agreements. Most wouldn't talk. But one, a mid-level engineer who'd worked on Starlink's government integration, agreed to meet in a public park, far from cameras. They sat on a bench, pretending to watch ducks. The engineer spoke in a low, steady voice. "We were told the emergency access was for national defense, but after a while you notice things. Data requests that didn't come from official channels, logs being copied to private servers, and always, someone watching to see how the public reacted when bits of truth were released." "Who gave those orders?" she asked. "Not one person. It was built into the culture. The idea that we, the tech elite, knew better. That democracy was too slow for the speed of crisis. That if we could show how broken things were, people would thank us for taking over." She felt sick. "And no one stopped it?" The engineer smiled sadly. "When your paycheck comes from someone building the future, it's hard to say the future is wrong." They parted without saying goodbye. That night she compiled everything. The chats, the contracts, the testimonies, the timeline. She didn't call it an exposé. She called it the quiet takeover. It laid out how, over years, a private empire had positioned itself not as a servant of democracy, but as its successor. She published it just before midnight. By dawn, it was everywhere. Not because it went viral, but because people shared it quietly in group texts, in workplace Slack channels, in hushed conversations. It wasn't exciting. It was terrifying, because it felt true. And then silence. Musk didn't respond. No tweet, no denial, no legal threat, just nothing. That was the scariest part of all. Because when someone doesn't bother to fight back, it usually means they don't have to. They already won. The silence stretched for 3 days. No tweets, no press releases, no cryptic posts from Musk. Just quiet. So complete it felt like the whole internet was holding its breath. People kept checking their feeds, waiting for the next twist, the next bombshell, the next move in a game no one fully understood. But nothing came. And then, on the 4th morning, Barack Obama spoke, not through a spokesperson, not in a carefully edited statement, but in a raw, unscripted video posted to a public archive site, one not owned by any major platform. He sat in what looked like a home office, sunlight streaming through the window, wearing a simple sweater, no tie, no podium. He looked tired but calm, Human. "I've stayed quiet," he began, "because I didn't want to add fuel to a fire built on half-truths. But silence can be mistaken for guilt. And in times like these, clarity matters more than comfort." He didn't deny the drill. He explained it plainly. A routine national security exercise, part of protocols every former president agrees to when they leave office. For a few hours, I was asked to stay in a secure location, while teams verified whether a simulated cyber attack had compromised communication channels. It wasn't an arrest. It wasn't detention. It was procedure, boring, unglamorous, and necessary. He paused, looked directly into the camera. But someone took that moment, twisted it, and turned it into a story about fear, control, and betrayal. And the real danger isn't the lie itself, it's how easily we believed it. That last line hit hard, because he was right. People had believed it, not because they were foolish, but because they were exhausted. Exhausted by broken promises, by institutions that seemed more interested in self-preservation than public service, by a world where truth felt slippery and power felt distant. The lie didn't succeed because it was clever. It succeeded because it felt plausible. Obama didn't attack Musk by name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who he meant when he said, "When one person controls the wires, the satellites, and the algorithms that shape what billions see and believe, that's not free speech. That's a new kind of gatekeeping." He warned that democracy couldn't survive if truth became just another product to be packaged, promoted, and sold to the highest bidder. The video spread fast, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt honest. People shared it with messages like, "This is what leadership sounds like," or "Finally someone talking like a human." Not a headline, but not everyone welcomed it. Within hours, online forums loyal to Musk's vision pushed back hard. "He's defending the system that failed us," one post read. "Why should we trust the old guard when they've done nothing but lie for decades?" Another, "Musk isn't trying to control us, he's giving us the tools to control ourselves." The narrative shifted again. Now it wasn't about Obama being arrested. It was about whether the public even wanted the old system back. The reporter watched it all unfold from her kitchen table, coffee gone cold. She'd expected outrage, maybe even threats. But what surprised her was the sadness in people's voices, the quiet frustration of those who felt trapped between two broken choices, a government they no longer trusted, and a billionaire promising freedom they weren't sure they could afford. She got a call from a colleague at a major news network. "We're doing a special tonight," they said. "We want you on the panel." Obama's team confirmed he'll be joining remotely. She almost said no. She was tired. Her inbox was full of angry messages. Her apartment felt less like a home and more like a bunker. But then she thought about the engineer in the park, the source who warned her to stop digging, the thousands of people reading her work not for entertainment, but for understanding. She said yes. That evening, she sat in a dimly lit studio with two other guests, a former White House advisor and a tech ethicist who'd once worked at one of Musk's companies. The host opened with Obama's video, then turned to her. "You've been at the center of this story from the beginning. What's really going on here?" She took a breath. "It's not about one man being falsely accused. It's about who gets to define reality. For decades, we trusted institutions, flawed as they were, to at least try to tell us the truth. Now we're being told that those institutions are so corrupt, we should hand over that responsibility to private actors who answer to shareholders, not citizens." The tech ethicist countered, "But isn't that better than a system where truth is buried in classified files no one sees? At least now people have access." "Access to what?" she asked. "A distorted clip? A manipulated timeline? A narrative designed to make you feel like the only solution is to tear everything down? That's not transparency. That's manipulation dressed up as rebellion." The debate grew heated but never personal, and then Obama appeared on screen. He listened quietly, then said something that stunned everyone. "I don't blame the public for doubting us. We earned that doubt. But replacing one unaccountable power with another isn't progress. It's just a different kind of surrender." He turned to the camera, speaking not to the panel but to the viewers at home. "Democracy isn't perfect. It's slow. It's messy. It requires patience and participation, but it's the only system where ordinary people get a say in their future. If we give that up because we're frustrated, we won't get freedom. We'll get a new kind of control, wrapped in the language of liberation." The studio fell silent. After the broadcast, the reporter walked out into the cool night air. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from strangers thanking her, from old friends checking in, from editors offering book deals. But one message stood out. It was short, from an unknown number. "You made them listen. Now they'll come for you harder." She didn't reply. She just looked up at the sky, where satellites she couldn't see circled silently overhead, carrying data, dreams, and dangers no one fully understood. The next morning, Congress announced a bipartisan investigation, not just into the Praetorian Veil drill, but into the role of private tech companies in national security operations. Lawmakers from both parties, usually at each other's throats, agreed on one thing. The line between public safety and private power had blurred too far. Musk still hadn't spoken publicly. But behind the scenes, his lawyers were already preparing responses. His companies issued statements about cooperating fully and supporting transparency. But insiders whispered that he wasn't worried, because by the time any report came out, the public would have moved on, and the real work, the quiet building of a new system, would continue. The reporter knew this wasn't over. The investigation would drag on for months, maybe years. Findings would be watered down. Compromises would be made. But something had shifted. People were asking questions they hadn't asked before. Who owns the truth? Who decides what we see? And who watches the watchers, especially when they're not even government employees? She sat down to write again. Not to expose, not to accuse, but to explain. To remind people that democracy wasn't a product to be upgraded, but a practice to be protected. That freedom wasn't just about having choices, but about understanding how those choices are shaped. As she typed, her window faced the street below. A delivery driver laughed with a neighbor. A kid rode a bike with training wheels. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. Life, ordinary and beautiful, kept going, unaware of the invisible battles being fought in data centers and boardrooms. And that, she realized, was what this was really about. Not satellites or secrets or billionaires, but the quiet dignity of everyday people who deserved to live in a world where truth wasn't a weapon and power wasn't a game. She saved her draft, closed her laptop, and made a fresh pot of coffee. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Months passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags stopped trending. The world moved on to the next crisis, the next scandal, the next shiny distraction. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Not in a dramatic, earth-shattering way, but in the quiet, stubborn way that real shifts often happen. Like roots growing under concrete, slow and unseen, until one day the ground cracks open. The congressional investigation wrapped up with a thick report that few people read in full. It confirmed what the reporter had uncovered. Obama was never arrested. The drill was real, the miscommunication was real, and yes, private satellite networks had been granted temporary access during the exercise. More importantly, it revealed that data from that access had been copied, stored, and later used to shape the leak that sparked the firestorm. The report stopped short of accusing anyone of breaking the law. It called it a gray zone of emerging policy. But it made one thing clear. No single person, no matter how rich or brilliant, should have the power to decide what the public sees as truth. Musk never admitted to orchestrating the leak. He didn't have to. In a rare interview, he simply said, "If the system hides the truth, someone has to shine a light, even if the light burns." To his supporters, it was heroic. To critics, it was chilling. But most people just shrugged. They were tired of the drama. They wanted to get back to their lives. Yet the ripple remained. Across the country, city councils, state legislatures, and even small tech startups began rethinking their relationship with big platforms. New proposals surfaced, laws requiring transparency and algorithmic amplification, rules limiting how private companies could access government emergency systems, even efforts to fund public alternatives to social media. Slow, boring and unprofitable, but accountable to the people, not shareholders. Obama didn't return to the spotlight. He kept a low profile, but quietly supported a new initiative, a coalition of former leaders, journalists, and technologists working on a digital public trust, a set of voluntary standards for how truth should be handled in the digital age. Not enforced by law, but built on shared values. Accuracy over speed, context over clicks, responsibility over reach. The reporter didn't become famous. She turned down book deals and TV offers. Instead, she started teaching. Online workshops for young journalists on how to dig without drowning, how to report without rage, how to tell hard truths without feeding the machine that profits from chaos. She called it Slow Truth. Attendance grew not because it was exciting, but because it felt honest.